My name is Vikas Badra, Associate Editor of Ace Update magazine, and I welcome you all to the online interaction on sustainable design ideas for emerging airports. As India gets urbanized, there will be a need for newer airports, especially in Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities. Apart from fostering connectivity, such airports also need to be sustainable in the long run. At the same time, it is crucial to make sure that any architectural changes made to current airports to get them future ready also takes into account the long term issues a country like India faces. Airports also need to be energy efficient, green, and sustainable, which means the design strategy adopted and the material utilized need to be carefully chosen. Keeping this agenda in mind, today ACE Update is conducting an online interaction on sustainable design ideas for emerging airports. We will be beginning with the panel discussion right away, hence we request our viewers to stay tuned and post their queries so that we can take it up at the end of the discussion. The distinguished speakers for today's interaction on sustainable design ideas for emerging airports are Mr. Dhananjay Patil from Systems 2, Mr. Anand Sharma from Design Forum International, Mr. R. Balkrishnan from L&T Construction, Ms. Ahana Miller from ABM, Ms. Nagesh Gupta from Green Building Council of India. Mr. Dhananjay, you are more into planning and designing of airports. So I want to begin. The first question I want to direct it at you. Like when it comes to designing sustainable airports, and especially in Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, what is one of the foremost challenges that you face?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Vikas. I think the opening question is a really great question. I think there are multiple challenges, particularly starting from the site selection. Okay, most of the time when architects receive this project, the site selection is done, but there are multiple challenges to select a site for ports, and particularly the problem which I see in today's airports is the connection for the public transport. If you see, I think Delhi is one place where you have a very good connection of public transport. The metro express line is connecting directly to the terminal 3, but most of the other metro city airports, okay, still the connection is not yet developed, and that leads to the traffic congestion and the environmental concerns. So particularly looking at the fast growing aviation trends and traffic, I think this situation is going to get more and more difficult. I think the management of transport and particularly giving more focus to the public transport, particularly metro, because even green fuel electrical cars are not going to help because that they will not reduce the congestion, but I think mass rapid transit and public transport strengthening is something I think will be a key point long term.
I think quite right. I'm pretty sure Mr. Balkrishnan has more to add on this. Mr. Balkrishnan, you're already smiling. So if you can just open up.
Yeah. Taking a cue from Mr. Nagesh, what he said, because energy is the main thing. See, airports traditionally known to be non-sustainable. It was in the past. So, but now it's not. I mean, there are a lot of thoughts into how to make it sustainable. And as he said, right from beginning, the energy efficient materials has to be chosen. First of all, what you're going to install in an airport, all the water fixtures and the electrical systems has to be efficient, and it should be required. When it is required, it has to work. So that sort of controls should be provided in the airport. Then only you can achieve all this sustainability. The other point is, which others have not touched upon, is using local materials as far as possible. Very nearby the cities, what is available materials, that needs to be used. Then it is more sustainable as an airport. So that is what few points I would like to mention.
Quite right. And when it comes to, when we talk about anything which is green and sustainable, the first thing which many times comes up is like the ROI, be it real estate, be it anything. So now, to what extent, should we, is it a tightrope walk, or is it just like another marketing gimmick that, okay, if it's green, it has to be very, very costly?
The return of investment normally in India, it's not being followed. I mean, it's not being understood, basically. So what you invest in an airport, especially on the solar energies and other things, there is definitely a payback period for it. I mean, what you're going to spend upfront, you're going to get it returned after a few years, then you're going to a positive mode. So there are various structures available within the country to fund this sort of things. Actually, in tier 1 cities and tier 2 cities, we understand the funding will be difficult, unlike the metros. But there are many other methods to get this on a sort of payback period basis and all. So there will be a definite return of investment possible in all these efforts, which is sustainable.
Right. Moving on, like now I want to throw the next question to our next two speakers, beginning with Ahana. Ahana, when it comes to designing the interiors of such airports, like what are some of the important parameters one needs to keep in mind?
When it comes to designing the interiors, what the challenge we faced is that in existing space. So I think we have to look at everything holistically. We have to look at the entire airport and then come down to our space and how that relates. One of the other things is materiality. That's the fundamental thing. When we start a project, we are looking at where are we getting our materials? Like Mr. Balakrishnan said, are they locally sourced? Are we importing? Is it international? So from the concept stage, we are sourcing these materials, evaluating their life cycle, evaluating their properties, how long are they going to last, and then only then proposing them as part of our concept. What architects do is they sort of do that after they propose their 3D renders and everything. So I think that's one step we've started to take now in future projects is to start with the materiality and then work backwards to the design. Let the materials sort of tell you how to design the space and what works best.
Mr. Sharma, would like to have your opinion on this as well.
With regard to material, we have always believed in creating and bringing contextuality to every environment, whether built or urban environment to play. And airports being very, very high traffic and very, very maintenance intensive material, we like to bring the design element by the choice of motifs that we use, by the choice of elements that we use. In airports, we try to bring what is unique to that region into the design that we are creating for the passenger. We try and put passenger experience traversing through the airport at the center of our design journey and build everything around it. In terms of what material to choose, we believe that maintenance, longevity, the ease of cleanliness, and eventually the return on investment on a particular material that is being used is at the top of our reasons to pick a certain material. For instance, in Guwahati Airport, we really made it a point and persuaded Airports Authority of India to use epoxy terrazzo for flooring. Now, it is a very, very high capex material, but if you consider it from the point of OPEX, it more than pays for it. It costs almost as much as putting Italian marble in internal spaces at almost 7,500 rupees a square meter or so. It is one of the costliest internal finishing materials for flooring that one can come up. But see the example of what has been done overseas in the US. Amman has done it, and now Delhi Airport is doing it. So I think in airports, maintenance and return on investment over a long period of time is normally the key reason that we can pick a material.
So spoke about maintenance, but now that reminds me, many airports, we take a cue from what is happening abroad and we try to emulate some of those designs. We try to incorporate some of those designs are pretty complex, and that's good. Design wise, we are reaching somewhere well and good, but the maintenance part of it, how difficult is that, and to keep it fresh for the international passenger, for the domestic passenger, for everybody. It's an image at the end of the day.
I think as architects, our prime responsibility is to pick materials which take the least amount of time. It would be very, very unwise to use a material which is maintenance intensive. So that is, I think, the first point of discussion. Okay. Use material that can do with the least amount of maintenance, number one. Secondly, there is something called carbon footprint of every material that we use, right? It is great to use the locally available stone, but if you see the amount of, the carbon footprint of excavating that stone, from wherever that quarry is, that question really needs to be looked at again. So we would rather use materials which are recycled. Bamboo, for instance. In Assam, there are materials which are made completely out of recycled bamboo. So there is the ease of maintaining it over periods of time. Having said that, positive trend, it's a public platform, but I believe I at least have the liberty to say that wherever the realm of operations has moved on from public sector maintenance to private sector maintenance, we have seen stuff happening better and better. Nice. So I think the ongoing trend of the way airport ownership is changing.
Yeah.
You can see with the airports which have been in private ownership for a while.
Right.
Airports which have recently come into private ownership,
Yeah.
the difference is all for all
Visible.
to see. The
Yeah.
maintenance quality has gone up,
True.
unmistakably. I think I've said enough. Yeah.
Right. Ahana, I think Mr. Anand gave a very honest opinion on maintenance, but still I wanted to ask you, like we have few airports have canopy materials, like, especially in tier 1 and tier 2 cities, they use canopy materials like tensile membranes installed. At times these materials kind of, they look dirty and unclean. So are there any better options instead of tensile membranes?
I know the Mumbai airport has these canopies that are coming in T1B across the forecourt. They have a team to climb up on those canopies, clean them, and then this happens every day. So we are actually expanding that canopy, and they have a full maintenance process set so that they can maintain it. So any material we suggest, anything we suggest as part of our design, we have to check with the airport, does this work for you? Will you be able to maintain it in the long run? So when we were proposing the extension of the tensile structure, this was the first thing we got an answer. So obviously, it depends on the airport. It depends on what you're trying to do with the tensile structure. How is it going to function? Is it going to help? There are a lot of questions that we have to think of before we're proposing anything. And I mean, now so many new materials coming up. I mean, you have so many possibilities. So we work in existing spaces. So if we have materials that are already being used, we try and continue using them so that the airport is able to maintain them in the long run.
The fact of life is, like I guess, like you pointed out, like in Mumbai airport, they do it on a regular basis. I think then, things work out even with tensile membranes. And they are known to be, a kind of a material which lasts in the long run and can be used as well. Which brings me to another query, Mr. Nagesh. Can you elucidate on the materials? We are talking about materials here. If you had to pick and choose a few key materials which you think will make our emerging airports more sustainable and green, what would they be?
A thumb rule, what we suggest is you actually look into your pick sheet. What we would suggest is to just have the material sheet in front of you and see what are those materials that are having high cost. So top 20-25 materials. So by weight, by volume, and by cost, you can identify those materials because eventually those are the materials that will be having a very high environmental impact.
Mr. Dhananjay, you're already involved in the construction of many airports and you worked on many of them. So one question which comes to my mind is, okay, we're talking about emerging airports, well and good, but we already have some established airports in the cities. And things can get difficult here because, they were designed in a different timeline. And now the population is changing, population density has increased. So, like how can they remain sustainable or what changes can be done given that they are already there and they have been there and there's an existing infrastructure in and around?
Because airports are flexible, need to be designed as flexible buildings because the technology will always keep on changing. So today we can anticipate, we can foresee some technologies coming up and can plan for that kind of technology. And tomorrow the situation may change. Okay, so the technology, like if you can see right now, the passenger processing is changing. A lot of people are using self backdrop. So we had designed self backdrop for the Bangalore Terminal 1 area, and similarly the processing for the security screening. Okay, so there will be new technologies coming in which require more space. So there will be this kind of challenges definitely, and we have to kind of go through those kind of challenges and to solve those kind of problems. And definitely most of the time the terminal buildings are large span structure. Some kind of retrofitting is required. You have to analyze what kind of capacity augmentation is required. Also the traffic is going to increase. So based on all those data, based on the calculations for the number of new processors and all, so this needs to be worked out. So I think the key is while designing for the new, yes, we have to make provisions, anticipate the flexibility, and for the existing airports, definitely, it will require a lot of retrofitting, some kind of replanning. We have done that kind of expansion for the Terminal 1 Bangalore, where we added this auto backdrops, which was a new technology. So we carved out a new space within the check-in hall, and even the baggage hall and the BHS system was expanded in such a way that it was operational airport. The operation should not stop. The plan has to be such that it should continue to work even in the construction stage. So I think there are challenges okay, definitely we are going to face these challenges to upgrade the existing airports, and it will be beneficial to plan it as much flexible as possible.
I think, yeah, retrofits are the key word when it comes to working on the existing airports. Mr. Balakrishnan, you're an MEP expert. So, like from that point of view, what are the challenges that you see, like Mr. Dhananjay Patil said, in existing airports, how would one, go ahead and address it?
Existing airports, as he said, there will be a lot of difficulties, and many of the systems in use is quite old. I mean, there will be a lot of energy inefficiencies. There will be space constraints. These sort of issues will definitely be there in an existing airport. So probably as a first step, there should be an audit on the existing airports, whether it's really energy efficient, water efficient, and space sufficiency. But we can address all this once we have a findings of what it is, and invest a little bit on materials, equipments and other things, whichever requires changes, like the lighting, the boards, the distribution boards, and the type of systems we are using for air conditioning, because somebody pointed out the air quality. Probably that is an issue right now in some of the smaller cities, airports. So all these need to be corrected, and then whatever expansion is required, we need to integrate into that system. So we'll have to look at energy efficiency, water efficiency, indoor air quality, and how to make the existing systems function properly without losing much of energy. This is what we need to do.
But there's another query which comes up is like, okay, we sorted out the problem of the existing airports, and we are building the new ones. And we want them to be energy efficient, we want them to be sustainable. But let's say there's a timeline to everything. There's a timeline to the airports which you have designed, let's say like 25 years earlier. Now even these airports which we are building right now will be older, like maybe 50 years down the pipeline. So at that point in time, one query which comes, what should be the lifespan of a reasonable, sustainable design? Like when do we know that we need to redesign? It needs some brushing up. So is there a expiry tag, attached to this?
Yeah, see, most of the electrical equipments and these equipments has a maximum lifeline of 25 years previously. Okay, so we need to look at changing things every 25 years. Having said that, the present day products and other things can go up to a 35 years lifespan. Okay. Whatever is new. Yeah. But the existing one, I've said the highest equipment 25 years, but some of the equipment has to be replaced within 10 to 12 years. So this has to be done, otherwise it's not going to sustain.
And now coming back to the design aspect, I want to direct this one at Ahana and Mr. Sharma. It's like Mr. Balakrishnan pointed out about the tech part of it. When it comes to the design, the interior design, and the experience that it creates in the mind of the passenger, like that also comes with an expiry date. Like how frequently do you think the design or the interiors need to be spec'd up, meet some things?
I think experiential spaces have no timestamp, right? Taj Mahal looks as surreal as it used to look 500 years ago. You create classics, you look at the works of Charles Fourier, you look at the work of Stein, it is timeless. So I guess the scale, the volume, the feeling of spaces, etc., if designed well, probably doesn't have a time. Number one. If the thing is, infused with the elements of the region that it belongs to, if the right motifs have been used, if the design is right, I think it is timeless. What is not timeless is the surface that you're walking on, the look and feel, the touch of the surfaces that you're coming in contact. Surfaces and areas which are getting extensively used. Toilets, for instance, the concourse areas, for instance, touch and feel zones, for instance. These are the areas where you need to design right. I think architecture is meant to be timeless. It is like a body and a soul. If architecture was the soul, the brick and mortar is the body. So body would age, but the soul would remain timeless. So I think no. So architecture doesn't have a time.
Ahana, I wanted to ask you, because Mr. Sharma gave a nice explanation out here. Are we making timeless creations when it comes to airport design?
That's a hard question. I would say yes and no. I feel a lot of times the airport design is driven by the client, the owner, the stakeholders, and there's so many people involved in it. Owners change. There's a life cycle to the process. So as that happens, tastes change. Now it's all about the millennials. That's where I come in. So when my father designed the lounges initially at the Mumbai airport. We had a different client. They wanted a more Indian style. Now we're designing in Bangalore. The client says, no, we don't want the Indian style. We want something contemporary. We want something millennial. Exactly that word has been used.
Yeah.
So honestly, we try and create the design to be timeless so that we are not, changing the entire look later, and we don't want the design to sort of, fade and, not be appreciated by the future generations as well. So we need to think about the future when we're designing right now.
Correct.
Which is why my input now into design with my father, it's helping that. And a lot of our clients, they come back to us in 5 years because they have a contract with the airport to say that after 5 years we have to change the look. So we keep that in mind. We have come back and we've been asked to redesign, to repropose. You'll see that in our projects where we've been told this has to be redesigned, the contract is up. So there's that as well that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah, and also like India, it's like maybe in the last 20 years, I think more and more Indians are getting, they've traveled abroad. The globalization is intense, and people are kind of exposed to what is there abroad. And also we have a lot of people coming in from abroad to India. So while designing, creating experiential spaces, Mr. Sharma, and also I wanted Ahana to, her opinion on this. How difficult it is to gratify that taste, There are so many people from different cultures, and each one has his own way or her way of looking at things and interpreting things. So is that a big challenge when it comes to designing the interiors of airports?
We get asked this all the time, and this is something that I'm going to be covering in my presentation later today. We are always asked when we're creating buildings of national importance like airports or port complexes or railway stations. We are always asked contextual, contemporary, classical, what, right? So this tug of war is always there. Right? There are some people who would want it to be contemporary, some people who would want it to have the flavors of the region, even in the facade. Even if it is cut and paste, so be it. Now, we have sort of derived a response based on our experience over a period of time. And specifically to airports, what I believe is there are two very clearly distinct user groups who are using that air. There is a user group which belongs to that region. You are in Patna. The Patna airport is your gateway to the world. So your airport has to be reminiscent of the region that you belong to, yet be the gateway to modernity that an airport represents. People leave exiting airport of Patna or Delhi, Aurangabad or wherever they are, going for a better future and a better life. Ask a person living in Aurangabad or Kochi or Mysuru or any B town or C town of this country, what do they aspire for? They would aspire for Whitefield, they would aspire for Cyber Park, they would aspire for Bandra Kurla complex, right? So there are aspirations. So it is the aspirations of the people of that city which have to be kept in mind. The other user group, and an equally and probably more important user group, is the person who's coming into that region. So for a visitor to that region, the airport is gateway to that region, right? So for the arriving passenger, the airport has to represent what that city, that region, or the country represents. Imagine the peacock motif in the ceiling of Mumbai T2, right? So beautifully done. Peacock. Nobody could have done this better than what they have done. It is so subtle, it is so tastefully done, and it is yet there. It conveys the message like that. Imagine the mudras at the arriving portion of T3. On the wall. So subtly, so beautifully, so elegantly conveying. So we endeavor to design our airport keeping both the user groups in mind, arriving passenger as well as for the departing. It's a tough, potpourri of aspirations to blend into one design, but this is what architects are supposed to do.
So I think he's put it correctly. You need to find this balance between local and international. So T2 is actually designed by a New York architect. It's SOM has designed it. We have to think about the Indian context, the peacock motif. And Sanjay Reddy, when he initiated the airport design, he had this idea in mind to have Indian artwork being installed in the airport. Now that idea in itself appeals to international travelers, it appeals to local people, it appeals to anybody who's traveling through the airport. So that what sets it apart. You have to think about that as well. So while we worked in a lot of these airports, the art component, which I'll talk about in my presentation, has been integrated because that is something the masses, it appeals to the masses and they love it. So it is the balance. It is, you have to have an airport that is internationally recognized as well as, local people, appreciate it as well.
I think that's the right way to go ahead. And be it sustainability, be it design, I think balance is the keyword. Be it an old airport or a new one, again, balance is the keyword.